Next question.
Let's do it.
One of the most powerful tools I've used as a military leader is rehearsals. I would love to hear your thoughts on rehearsals.
So rehearsals, and this is actually shocking that I've never talked about rehearsals.
Rehearsals like what? Like, oh, we're going to do
When you're
this,
doing
like a
a
practice,
mission,
like a dress
you're gonna
rehearsal.
practice for it.
Yes,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And they're totally critical. And one of the biggest parts of preparing for an operation correctly, we used to have this, they used to say 1/3 planning, 1/3 gear prep, and 1/3 rehearsals. That's how you're supposed to spend your time. And it's a rule that gets violated very often because people spend too much time planning and not enough time rehearsing. So I would always try and push the rehearsals as much as possible. And when I was in charge of troops, I would try and push rehearsals. And then when I was training troops, I would try and get them to rehearse. But it's hard. Like I said, people get drawn into the planning piece. But a plan without a rehearsal is not a plan, really. So, definitely use the rehearsals. Rehearse as much as you can. Be hard on yourself during rehearsals. Rehearse contingencies. That's something we used to do that I was pretty intent on, was rehearsing the contingencies. So what could go wrong here? What could go different at the target area? What's a different alternate route that we might have to hit the target from? And just go through a couple of those contingencies. And actually, when you do that, make sure if you rehearse a couple contingencies, if you rehearse your main plan, let's say you walk through it 3 times, then you rehearse 2 or 3 contingencies, go back and do the main plan 2 more times. Just so that's what they leave with.
Oh, yeah.
So you want that in their heads.
Yeah.
You want that in their heads because otherwise there'll be a little bit of confusion. But you definitely want to rehearse some contingencies as well. And we also would rehearse the things that happened all the time. So even, a good example was like our breach team, which is the team that kind of goes in to blow up a door so you can get in the building, and they have their little procedures. That breach team would rehearse over and over and over again so that they're really just smooth and good, and they don't have to talk, and they can do things very quickly. And the way we got into vehicles and out of vehicles, we always rehearsed that, even though we'd rehearsed it by the end of deployment, you've rehearsed that hundreds of times, and you still go, all right, hey, dismount the vehicles and get in formation, because it's just another time, more muscle memory for everybody. And you could do it with all the stuff that you do in the field, whether you're calling in a helicopter for a casualty evacuation, how you're going to set up that landing zone. You rehearse that a few times. Just do it, a couple times before you roll out on an operation. That way, when it happens, everybody knows what to do. And this obviously translates directly to everything else. I mean, especially in business. I mean, we work with construction companies, and I a lot of times talk about safety with construction companies because they lose lives, they lose money, they lose jobs because if they have safety incidences. And how do they handle when they happen? What do you do? So, rehearsing the emergency procedures of when something happens, rehearsing the setup before you start a certain type of, construction operation, that's good. Even with the sales world, like when I, a lot of teams that just about every business has some sort of sales force in it, right? Where that are trying to sell things. And how do you rehearse for them? Well, you do some role playing where, somebody gets on and plays the super hard client, somebody gets on and complains. Let's rehearse. Let's how are you going to talk through when somebody calls up to complain? And in 2 or 3 iterations, people will improve on how they handle complaints and how they handle a super hard client, how they overcome some objections. But you do that through rehearsal, and it makes you better. It's another rehearsal would be like we work with the gas oil industry. So how are they going to handle when there's a leak? How are they going to handle when there's some kind of a ecological problem or a fire? What are you going to do? Oh, you're going to dial this number? Okay, let's check that number works. How long has that number been in this little pamphlet that's been sitting by the phone? When's the last time that got checked out? Where is the communications nodes? What if they get hit? What's the alternative plan? So rehearsals are awesome. The finance world, we see it as well. What if there's a drastic downturn in the market or a drastic upturn? Do you have a rehearsed plan of what you're going to do, who you're going to contact? If you have decisions to make, triggers have been hit, just rehearse that stuff.
Yeah.
Just rehearse it so everybody knows. And it's very, very helpful. I know when I was in charge of training, I had a very squared away and fired up corpsman, who's our medical support. And he just, I talked about rehearsals one time or whatever, and he came to me and said, hey, we're going to rehearse all of our casualty evacuations for all of our different training sites. So, and he did, and he'd come back and he'd find, hey, guess what? This is what I found on this one. The life flight that we were supposed to call didn't exist anymore. They went out of business, or they changed their number, or whatever. Or this LZ that we were planning on using has a house on it now. And so he found real stuff. And you know what? This particular guy, great guy, in that time, he got all those casualty evacuation plans squared away. And in that year, we actually did 2 real casualty evacuations from training sites for real critical injuries. And both of them went super smooth, all because of his efforts. And they ran full rehearsals. And so just that kind of thing. Those things save lives for sure. Just doing those full rehearsals. So yes, rehearse, and rehearse in anything that you're doing, because it'll make you better.
Yeah, especially where I would think that anytime you're in a situation where being on the spot is a big factor, where you have to make a decision quick. You don't have a day or 2 days to, analyze and make a decision. I feel like rehearsal would be a critical part of preparing for something like that.
Yeah, and you can do that with the decision making. Sure, you can set up all kinds of rehearsals for decision making in whatever industry you're in. But what I like to do is make those decisions critical, make those challenging, so that you're putting somebody on the spot, you're putting a leader in the spot. And I'll tell you what, one thing that's very cool about this, and this is something you could carry over to everything you do, it goes to decentralized command, it goes to instilling initiative in people. You run rehearsals where the only solution is to go outside the box of the plan.
Oh, during the rehearsal?
During the rehearsal.
Yeah.
Or a rehearsal where the only solution is to disobey what the order is.
Oh, dang, yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing this up specifically is because you're talking about rehearsing when there's decisions that need to be made. So this is going a little bit from rehearsal almost into a training scenario, right? Yeah. So we're getting away from rehearsal where you're rehearsing a specific operation into a training scenario where what you're trying to do in training is you're trying to get people to think. You're trying to get people to think on their own. And that is the most beautiful thing that you want as a leader, is you want all your people thinking. And you want them to be able to think with a completely open mind, a mind that's been completely freed from constraints. And the way that you do that, one of the ways that you do that, one of the methodologies you can use to do that is everybody's got their box, right, that they're stuck in. So you formulate a problem that the only way that they're going to solve the problem is to get outside of that box. And one of the best ones is you put somebody in a situation where you put parameters on them. And you say, hey, no matter what, you're not allowed to go across this line. And then you put them in a situation where they have to cross that line. And the only way they're going to win is to cross that line. And then they come back and they say, well, you didn't tell me not to cross that line. You know what? I didn't tell you to get all your guys killed. Or I didn't tell you to not make that investment even in this critical situation. Or I didn't tell you not to do that if we had an ecological disaster that was going on, right? So you need to train people to use common sense. That's what you want to train them to do. And it's very hard. You'd be surprised at how constrained people's brains get. Mine, yours, everybody, we get stuck. And so it's great to do drilling and training where you are actually opening up the mind and freeing the mind from any kind of constraint, where you can see things from varied perspectives that are different from your own, and you can see outlets and solutions that you would never have seen if you trapped yourself inside your box. And those are the kind of training scenarios that are outstanding. And those are the kind of training scenarios that make people better leaders and better decision makers. Because the key thing that they learn how to do is they learn how to detach even at that moment. We talk about it all the time. But if you can't detach from that situation and you can't detach far enough away from the picture to see that the only way you're going to solve this problem is by going across that line that you were told not to go across, If you can't make that detachment, you're never going to cross that line. You're never going to open your mind. You're never going to see that solution. And that is a horrible trap to be stuck in.
Yeah. On the movie Boiler Room, where during the training, they give them it's a sales thing. So
Right.
they give them all these index cards with rebuttals, right? Like, oh, my wife won't let me buy this.
Right.
You know.
Oh, your wife runs your family? Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
You ever see that movie, Boiler Room?
I have seen it.
It's dope.
Yeah, there's some good training in there on how to overcome those objections, and people become better at it. And the more you give them to chew on, the better they'll get at it. And it's the same thing where you're trying to give people the tools. But, I want to go into that scenario and I want to ask them a question when I'm training them that I want to give them an objection that they've never heard before. Right. So let them think on their feet. Let them step back and say, hey, you know what? This one's not on the cards. Where am I going to go with it?
Right. Yeah, the card seems like that would fall within rehearsal.
Right.
You know? And it's expanded rehearsal.
Yeah, I bet you they get 95% of the common objections that you get. You talk to a car salesman, they hear X amount of objections. Yeah. You talk to a phone salesman or an internet salesman or whoever calls you up on the phone, they hear the same. The solar people, right? The solar people call you all the time, or the power company calls you with this, or the other cable company calls you with their offer. They hear the same objections all the time. You know what I mean? So they train for those for sure.
Bro, I was coming out of Vaughn's, and they were like, hey, come here, I got something. Check this out. It's the ones where you can sponsor a child, one of those kinds of things, right? So I was like, hey, we donate, but we like to research and look into. And before I could really finish the sentence, I was going to say I like to look into all the programs that we donate to or consider donating to. Before I could finish the sentence, or right when I finished the sentence, he was like, a lot of people are concerned about where the money goes and all the stuff. And he knew everything. I was like, oh, these guys are getting advanced.
Slick.
Right there. Yeah, man. That's how he was prepared. He rehearsed.
Good for him.
And was trained.